I request everyone to remain seated. We're moving straight to the third session, which is Progress and Experiences in the Global South. Our speakers today, can you hear me? Our speakers today are important voices from a hemisphere which holds the majority of the world's population and that is disproportionately impacted by climate change. Our first speaker is Mr. Anshu Bharadwaj. Mr. Anshu is the Program Director of the Green Transition and Climate Vertical at the Niti Aayog. A former civil servant with the Indian Administrative Services, he has worked across governments, think tanks, philanthropies on energy and climate action. Welcome, Mr. Anshu. Our next speaker is Ms. Kamala Fabrian. Ms. Kamala is an official of the Just Energy Transition Partnership Secretariat, Indonesia, where she manages the Just Transition portfolio. She represents a nodal agency in the Global South that is implementing the JET investment plan today. Welcome, Ms. Kamala. Our third speaker joining virtually is Ms. Lebogang Mulesi. Ms. Lebogang is the executive manager responsible for policy and research in the Presidential Climate Commission South Africa. A long-term advocate for labor rights, she's known for a blueprint she developed for workers on how to transition to a low-carbon economy. Welcome, Ms. Lebogang. Our fourth speaker also joining virtually is Mr. Khalid Hashim. Mr. Khalid is an Egyptian diplomat and climate negotiator who is in the hot seat ahead of Baku as he is the G77 and China coordinator for Just Transitions. He is currently Director of Affairs at the Environment Department of Egypt's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you for joining us. Finally, our fifth speaker is Mr. Nilesh Shah, Joint Secretary, Climate Change and International Cooperation from the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Government of India. Grateful to have him amongst us. Dr. Chandrabhushan, CEO of iForest, who's moderating this session.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I thought that the previous session was quite fiery. I have taken few quotes. One of the quote was, "North and South divide will pass into history." That was one of the quotes from the last session. I'm not sure that how many of the people on the Global South panel will agree to it, but this is something that I will ask them to respond. The issue of finance, whether it is about money coming from developed to developing country or it is about partnership, is something which is very, very important to understand. For 15 years, I have worked at Montreal Protocol, which is possibly the most successful environmental treaty that we have seen in healing the ozone layer. And for every $1 that developed countries gave to Montreal, to developing country under Montreal Protocol, developing country put 15. So was it a resource transfer from developed to developing, or was it a partnership? So the finance issue, essentially, I believe, is mired into pedantics and is not actually what it should be, a global partnership to solve global environmental challenge, which benefits everyone. It is not about only India or only China or only Europe. Climate action in any country benefits all. I think if we understand that, then we will understand the implication of how this international financial cooperation will work. I wanted to make this point because I just thought that, in fact, I would have recommended in the last panel, few Global South, to have a little more fiery debate than what actually happened. Okay, we have an excellent panel, short time. I want to set the rules up front. I will not allow any one of you to speak for more than 5 minutes to a question. We will have the second round of question, which is going to be 3 minutes. I will have 15 minutes for the house to ask whatever you want to ask. And we have 2 presentations. In fact, The two representatives from Just Transition departments of Indonesia and South Africa requested that they would like to make short presentation. So maybe that's where I'm going to start. Okay? I'm going to request you for your presentation. Okay? Tell us what Indonesia is doing on Just Transition.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bhushan. So I'm gonna make it very quick, 5 minutes. So my name is Kamala Fabrian. You can call me Lala, that's my stage name, easier to remember. I represent the Just Energy Transition Partnership, or we call it the JETP, Secretariat Indonesia. I believe my colleague here from South Africa also has one, and also from Vietnam also has one. I'm gonna be speaking about Indonesia specifically. So next slide, please. Okay, so there are a lot of questions pertaining JETP. People ask whether is it a part of the government of Indonesia or is it a separate entity? So a simple answer would be JETP is a bridge between the government of Indonesia and the government of 10 other countries which are listed here. It is basically the G7 plus EU, Denmark, and Norway. And from the get-go, we kickstarted with specific ambitions, principles, and outputs outlined in the joint statement. And just like iForest that was founded during India's G20 presidency last year, JETP was also kickstarted during our presidency back in 2022. So we basically focus on electrification. We would like to reach ambitious targets, but manageable. Also, we're doing ambitious emission trajectories, penetration of renewable energies, as well as accelerating net zero emission targets in the power sector. Also, we're seeing that JETP could contribute positively towards Indonesia's economy and ensure the energy affordability, guaranteeing energy security, stability, while ensuring the just transition. I would like to echo what people have been mentioning previously. There's no use of doing the transition if it's at the cost of the people's well-being, the people's jobs, and even the people's lives. And also, while maintaining long-term financial sustainability for PLN, which is our state-owned enterprise that makes power available, and its subsidiaries. Now, how do we do that? That could only be achieved by working with our partners, which are these 10 countries. We call them the IPGs, or International Partner Groups, as well as GFANs, in channeling, mobilizing the $20 billion commitment over the next 3 to 5 years. And we have a combination of instruments. There are concessional loans, non-concessional loans, TAs, grants, as well as equity, in hopes to achieve all of that. Yes, can you go next? Yes, and so this was our first homework last year. So I entered, the JETP Secretariat started working effectively starting from May or April 2023. And within 6 months, on November 2023, we started in June, writing the CIPP, which is a comprehensive investment and policy plan. It's a 300-page long document that you can download on our website. And it is a living document, which is updated regularly. The plan was to also update it this year, but for it to be updated, we rely on certain government policies. So for 2024, it may be this year, it may be next year. It also depends on the new cabinet that is going to be elected. There's going to be inaugurated just a week from now. We can go next. So the CIPP 2023 was our first task, and so what do we like to achieve? The target by 2023 is to achieve the 250 metric CO2 emission, which is on-grid, 44% renewable generation share. Also, we calculated that we need $97.3 billion for just transition pathways for the same year, and for 2030. We have also mapped 400 priority projects that would need $66.9 billion to start by 2030, and also while creating a positive socio-economic impact throughout the process. Next, please. Yes, and we have also mapped 6 investment focus areas. We've identified that. The first one being the energy efficiency and electrification. That is our topmost priority just because we call it triple EWG. The triple E is the most critical. in terms of energy transition, because just like the same concept for reduce, reuse, recycle, the first thing before recycling things is obviously to reduce, right? So we focus first on energy efficiency and electrification, and we also focus on developing the transmission network, the grids. And for the third and fourth, we focus on renewables. For the third, we focus on geothermal as well as hydropower. The fourth, we focus on solar as well as wind power plants. And for the fifth, we're talking about early retirement of the CFPPs. And for the last one, we develop the renewable energy supply chain. So yeah, I hope that's a 5-minute for me. I didn't get
thank
stopped.
you very much.
I didn't hear anything.
5 minutes. A big hand, please.
Thank you.
Lebogang, are you ready for your presentation? Is she online?
Sorry, struggling to unmute myself here. Let me just get my presentation on presentation mode quickly.
Okay.
There we go. This is a very difficult act to follow and try to do it in such a short time, such as the previous speaker. So safe to say thank you to the IFRS team for inviting me to present on South Africa's perspective on the just energy transition. I've just, as an information, just prepared a slide on, the organization that I represent, the Presidential Climate Commission. We are set up by the president of the country, and the deputy chairperson of our commission is Deputy Chair Vali Musa, and we are led by, the secretariat is led by Christian Olga. Maybe just to reflect on the fact that in terms of the IPG countries that are part of South Africa's JETP, initially we had the EU, France, Germany, the UK, as well as the US that were a part of this international partnership group. Additional to that, we were joined by Denmark as well as the Netherlands, and then there are new countries that have joined South Africa's IPG countries that are not necessarily a part of the IPG, who are Spain, Switzerland, as well as Canada. So grant funding or the funding agreements are either grants, highly concessional climate loans, concessional loans, as well as commercial debt equity or export credits, the total of which totaling to about 84.6 billion. The process that we followed post-Glasgow, COP that took place in Glasgow, there was a political declaration among the initial IPG countries expressing an interest to help South Africa transition to a low-carbon economy. An additional process to that has been that South Africa has developed a jet investment plan, which was then presented to the subsequent COP. I believe it was in Sharm el-Sheikh. And then South Africa has also developed an implementation plan to accompany this JET program. All of this information that I'm talking to is available on South Africa's presidency's page. Just to indicate, the investment priority is not very different to what the previous speaker had highlighted. So we are committing 4.7.2 billion to the electricity sector in South Africa that requires significant reform, because above 80% of our electricity is generated from coal. So this funding is meant to help us diversify and put in more renewable energy and funding to that particular purpose. There is an identification of 8.5 billion that will be sent to the NEV sector in order to explore the inclusion and expansion on the NEV vehicles here in South Africa. And there's an allocation of 21.2 billion for green hydrogen, 180 million going in the direction of skills development, as well as municipal capabilities that will help key municipalities in South Africa to be able to transition and provide some just transition support that will help municipalities be able to adapt and transition in a manner that is just. I quickly want to refer to some key milestones that have been reached. Government has issued a determination for more than 14,000 megawatts of new generation capacity to be procured from wind, solar, and battery storage. We have also seen 3 hybrid solar and battery storage projects from the risk mitigation program that are in construction and will connect to the grid. In terms of just the grant funding that we have achieved to date, 50% of pledge funding for the JET-IP has been deployed to donor-approved projects to date, while 35% is still in planning stages. And just to indicate, because time is not on our side, that there is a commitment around 26% of grant allocation being given to our whole belt region here in South Africa, so that we can provide socio-economic opportunities for that region to be able to diversify and create opportunities that are not necessarily linked to coal-related activity. So that's at a very high level, milestones to be reached. I just also wanted to indicate as part of this presentation that the Presidential Climate Commission will be doing a midterm review of South Africa's JET-IP process to determine what has come in terms of funding opportunities, what has been spent, what it has been spent on, and what just transition outcomes have emanated from the spending of those resources. But that is a process that we are proceeding next year as we reach the midterm for JET-IP funding in South Africa. I know it's going to be a question that's going to come up later, just the question around how do we leverage JET-IP funding in order to make it scale so that we can achieve the imperatives of a just transition, because we know that this transition is quite costly. So the idea is really to leverage around highly concessional support to drive a green industrialization plan. South Africa has just released the South African Renewable Energy Masters Plan, and the idea is to give impetus to these existing policy frameworks and to drive investment in clean energy tax credits, green energy manufacturing, residential efficiency and electrification, grow value chains, modernize power grids, rail and public transport, EV power grids, as well as building a level of infrastructure resilience. I hope I was to the point, so that we can have an opportunity to hear from other speakers as well. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much. Okay. So Anshu, let me start with you. You lead that interministerial working group that Niti Aayog has set up on net zero. The finance minister in this budget announced a white paper on energy transition. She wants to come out. In fact, that was received very positively by all of us. For the first time in a national budget, the government announced that it wants to come out with a white paper on energy transition. Tell us something about what is happening with the interministerial working group, but most specifically how you are trying to incorporate the just element, the just transition element in this very important interministerial working group that you are heading.
Thank you, CB. And I'll start with a congratulations to you and the iForest team for your 5 years of completion. It's a fantastic achievement to all of you. It takes a lot of effort to build an organization, so kudos to you and your team for this outstanding effort. Yes, so in NITI, we have put together this interministerial working groups to develop a pathways for India to achieve its pledge of net zero by 2070. There are 9 different working groups which consist of all relevant ministries, plus members of from the academia, think tanks, and industry bodies. The ministries are represented in all the working groups. MOEF is in all of them. So the objective, the way we framed the problem is the following. India has developmental aspirations to become a developed country by 2047 and with a GDP of about 30 trillion by that time. So that's about 10 times the current GDP number of about 3.5 trillion to 30 trillion in 2047. That's one. How do we achieve that in a manner which is consistent with climate commitments of net zero by 2070? that's how we framed the problem, achieving net zero in the context of our developmental aspirations. And this is different from how the developed countries are looking at mitigation and their net zero pledges, because they are looking at mitigation after achieving very high levels of economic development from very high per capita CO2 emission levels and trying to bring it down to zero, whereas we are starting from a base of 2.2 tons per capita. So it's a very different framing of the problem. That's point number one. Point number two is that even while we are trying to develop and mitigate, climate change is already here and now. So we are already facing the impacts of climate change. We living in Delhi faced an incredibly hot summer this time with temperatures crossing 52. There were deaths in Delhi and there were extreme weather events in other parts of the country. So how do we'll have to factor in adaptation as an important component of our developmental pathway. So again, that's a new which India is working with. So that makes a pretty complex problem of development plus adaptation plus mitigation. And keeping that in mind, we made these groups fairly representative of all ministries. We defined detailed TORs to understand each of the issues in great depth. Now, where we are right now is we have a good handle on the analytical modeling. We have sort of come up with some analysis of what the pathways will look like till 2040s and beyond. We are discussing internally with the various ministries. Hopefully, in a few months, we'll have an analysis which will be in the public domain, which we can share with all the relevant stakeholders. It will answer the key questions of what will be India's transition pathways. Like you mentioned, FM did mention about the energy transition. So once this analysis is done, it will provide us an energy transition pathway, obviously. It will be an immediate outcome of that study. Coming to your second question, and just very briefly, 1 minute, we have very closely understood that the social transition is an integral part of this entire story. Whether it is coal or oil or gas, the social aspects will be an incredibly important part of it. And that's why we have one working group which explores this. It's not that it's a separate working group. What they're doing is linked to the entire picture. So we're looking at all the sectors, how they're trying to move away from fossil fuels, and how the social aspects will be addressed. Number two is also the aspect of economic distribution of activity within the country. For example, coal mining is concentrated largely in the states of Odisha, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, which account for 80% of India's coal production. They also get about 80% of the royalty plus revenues with coal. Whereas if you look at where the investments are happening in clean technologies, they're mostly in the western to southern parts of the country. Rajasthan, Gujarat, Maharashtra, that belt. How that changes the social fabric or economic fabric of country is an important factor to consider. So we will be looking at all these aspects, and I'll stop here.
Thank you, Anshu, for telling us. Yeah, please. Okay, before I go to Khalid, let me start with you, Nilesh, and little bit about your role. You're on the hot chair because you also lead India's negotiations at UNFCCC. There is discussion happening on just transition. It has been happening for close to a year now. You will be negotiating again at Baku. What has been India's experience of negotiating this just transition at UNFCCC? And what would be an ideal outcome that you see as a negotiator on just transition?
Thank you, CV. First of all, thank you for inviting me here, and probably this is one of my first times to be on such kind of panel. So thank you for calling me here. But actually, by inviting me to talk on this particular subject, you are preempting what Khalid should be speaking. You know, Khalid leads the G77 plus China group on just transition, and in fact, we should be actually following what he is saying. Okay, he's our leader there. But still,
That's the best answer a bureaucrat can give you.
but I think so. All of the audience here, they are aware as far as just transition is concerned. Just transition is mentioned in the preambular part of the Paris Agreement, and there it was with respect to the workforce, just transition of the workforce. But in 2022 at Sharm el-Sheikh, when we had the decision on the just transition, it included the social and economic aspects as well. So now the ambit has been expanded, and I think so for developing countries, it's a very, very welcome decision that was there. But then it is also being followed up with a just transition work program. And the work program envisages a series of discussions. And the discussions can or may lead to certain decisions being taken in different COPs. So I would rather talk about the process as to how the just transition is being dealt with at the UNFCCC process, at the UNFCCC during the COPs. As far as the positions that are concerned, I think so, as I said right in the beginning, I would rather have Khalid really talk about what the developing countries' positions are. Our country's position has been aligned with the G77 plus China, and of course, we also are in some other groupings like the LMDC, like-minded developing countries. And the core of our kind of point that we are making in our negotiations is that when we talk of just transition, it's not necessarily a country-specific transition that we are looking at. We are looking at the global transition. And when we look at global transition, again, what are the transition elements? Of course, mitigation is one of the first, very important ones. And when we are looking at mitigation, we come down to the Article 4 of Paris Agreement. And that has very clear stipulations as to who has to lead in the activities on mitigation, which is, of course, the developed countries. And developed countries have really, they have, many developed countries have peaked as far as their emissions are concerned, but they still have to go down drastically in their emission levels. That also calls for transition on their part. And when they lead and they share the experiences with developing countries like us, that's going to really be very helpful for the developing countries in undertaking transitions. And when we talk of global just transition, that also serves the purpose of the just in the global just transition aspect. So that's one aspect that we have been highlighting. And of course, when we are talking of transition at the local level or say the country level, as I mentioned, the social and economic aspects have been introduced in just a year and a half back. So it is going to take time for countries to really come up. Everybody had transition kind of plans in a way. When we talk of a transition plan from our country, our transition plan, we have always believed it is kind of shown through our NDC's commitment and also our long-term low-carbon development strategy. So that kind of outlines our approach to the just transition. But yes, now very specific activity is being undertaken at NITI Aayog. They have broadly 6 working groups, but then if you break up, there are sub-working groups. There are almost 10 working groups. We are there in all the working groups. And we are looking forward to the results of the work that is being done. One point I must mention here is that it is also going to be dependent on, outcomes are going to be dependent on a lot of modelings and assumptions. And whole of the discourse on climate change is also guided by modeling and assumptions being undertaken by the big body IPCC. And in the AR6, they have very clearly enumerated in one of the boxes, I think so box C1, where they have mentioned that the models and assumptions that they have undertaken to come out with various findings that they have, that does not address global equity, environmental justice, and intra-regional income distribution. So I think so when we are talking of just transition and we are engaging into various modeling exercises, this element has to be willy-nilly part of the assumptions. So if they are not part of the assumptions, I think so we are just talking of certain transitions based on certain assumptions, and we are missing out on the just element. Thank you very much.
Khalid, everyone is eager to hear from you. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, thank you very much, Dr. Chandra. Good morning, everyone. First, let me start, by thanking you for having me on this panel and on this important second dialogue. And let me say that it would be hard to just come after a seasoned negotiator as my colleague Nalish, and he gave like a lot of background on the state of play on the negotiations with regard to the just transition. But let me try to change the strategy here, and let me start by giving some reflections on the previous session that I was able to follow. Basically, I wanted to start with the differentiation between the North and South, because I want to shed some light here that the differentiation between the North and South isn't academic, isn't a rhetorical thing, but rather it is a reality embedded within the international law framework. And this has always been the guidance toward the climate action, where there is differentiation between the North and South. And I mean, the G77 and China view to the work program for the just transition pathway is to achieve the transition to a sustainable future that leaves no one behind. So also, I mean, the definition of the just transition from our point of view rather would be more comprehensive and would be rather looking forward towards the sustainable future through enabling the achievement not only low carbon economies, but rather more resilient economies as well. So the resilience part has been undermined under our dialogue and our discussions since we started, but we are keen to bring that at the forefront. That and this is also part of the differentiation between the North and South, because when you ask developing countries to maintain more resilient economies, we are not on the same ground as the developed North, where they have the ability to maintain this resilient economies that would be tolerable to different shocks, including the shocks that are a result of climate change, and also the shocks that would be associated with a disruptive transition that is not just unequitable. So it is very important to bring this resilience part into the dialogue and the discussions. Also, I wanted to shed some light on the historical responsibility, because it was very clear from the interventions made earlier in the previous session, recalling the harsh conditions of developing countries while growing up in the 60s and 70s is a real testimony of historical responsibility. I mean, we are not starting from the same ground. I mean, back then, yes, it is the political will and the available data that now we have, that we have to transition for the good sake of our citizens and our people, and from a people-centric approach, from a bottom-up approach. Yes, but I mean, the historical responsibility of the North within the differentiation itself made the economies of the developed countries more resilient and more tolerable to the current transition that we are going through. Just, I wanted to start, I mean, my intervention by quick reflections on these, and I just like giving more elaboration on the North-South differentiation that is embedded within the principles and the I mean, goals of the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. Aligning with the principles of a just, I mean, so basically the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement have long emphasized the principles that align with the principles of just transitions. Even if they haven't always used the specific term, these principles include equity by ensuring that climate action are fair and just, taking into account the different capacities and responsibilities of countries. Second, by the historical responsibility through recognizing that developed countries have historically contributed more to greenhouse gas emissions and therefore have a greater responsibility to lead in mitigation efforts, taking into account the carbon budget. It's also an important issue that is being coming under the negotiations, the carbon budget and the just allocation of the carbon budget. It is something that we have to reflect on, and we are aiming to see that the work program will be able to deliver on that. Third, also the principle of the common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. So this principle acknowledges that while all countries are responsible for addressing climate change, their obligations differ based on their historical contributions and current capabilities. These principles form the foundation of the climate action under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. They ensure that efforts to combat climate change are not only effective, but also just and equitable. By integrating these principles, the international community aims to achieve a transition that benefits all, particularly those most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. In essence, while the term just transition might not always be explicitly mentioned, its essence is deeply rooted in the core principles and guiding global climate action. By this, we would ensure that the transitions to a sustainable future is inclusive and equitable, addressing the needs and rights of all involved. So basically, these are the principles that has been always guiding us. Just transition as a work program within the negotiations, it's new, it has been established, but the just transition principles themselves are embedded within the main principles of the climate action under the legal framework of the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. So basically, we had we had 2 dialogues under the work program since its operationalization in Dubai last year. These 2 dialogues brought forward the discussions, and it's pretty much similar to the discussion that you are having right now under your dialogue, with the involvement of non-party stakeholders alongside with the parties of the agreement as well. They have been constructive in a way that they brought forward experiences and best practices towards the achievement of the just transition. But I mean, though it clearly showed also the disparities in the comprehensiveness of the approaches applied, basically, while the developed countries have comprehensive approaches for their own transitions backed by attainable financial mechanisms, the developing countries are still struggling to show to secure adequate, predictable, and accessible financial mechanisms to funnel their transition and maintain the basic economic and social indices in line with sustainable development and poverty eradication. As Nilesh has, put it very clearly, the social dimensions are an important part, and we are trying to put that in place. But yet, the most important discussion that is always coming under our dialogues under the work program is the financial implications and the financial needs that the developing countries would require in line with the principles and the goals of the Paris Agreement and the Convention. I believe I took too much of my time, so I will leave it for other colleagues to give their reflection.
Yeah, I
Thank you
think
very much.
negotiation teaches you to speak a lot, right? Thanks. Okay. Anshu, I just want to come back to you because the discussion was happening on finance. Is your working group, interministerial, going to also estimate some cost figures? How much is going to cost us? And
Yes, absolutely. There is one of the working groups is on the finance needs, and there the focus is on how much is the finance required, what type of money is required, and what are the ways to source it. So, for example, looking at different sectors in industry, power, transport, within that, the various interventions which will lead us to net zero. How do we classify those interventions? Some are commercially available. For example, solar today is commercially available, and the issue is how we scale and accelerate it. Solar plus storage is not commercial today. right? So it needs some intervention to make it available at a price which DISCOMs can purchase. Green hydrogen, for example, again, is not commercial today, even though it's an important intervention for achieving the transition goals, but it is not commercial. So we're trying to look at different interventions and what type of money is required to drive its adoption. And then the issue is, how do you source the money? How much of it could come from domestic sources, and how much of it we will be relying on international funding? Within domestic sources, the commercial capital, the government money. So that's how we're trying to work it out.
Okay. Kamala, you know, JETP is only going to give you about $20 billion, right?
Yes.
But you have estimated the cost of this transition to be $550 billion
That's also correct.
from,
From the Indonesian government, yes.
from now till 2030.
Right.
You're talking about $600 billion. JETP is only about $20 billion. From where are you going to get the rest of the money?
So here's the thing, right? JETP Secretariat is only one of the tools of the Indonesian government to achieve the target by 2030. We have our own national task force that deals with that. It comprises of several ministries led by, currently, before the new cabinet, I don't know what's going to happen in the next few days, but currently it is led by the Coordinating Ministry of Investment and Maritime Affairs and several other ministries. And JETP is also working closely with a joint office that is created by the task force and also PLN, our state-owned enterprise that provides electricity. So yeah, if we want to rely solely on JETP, we can never achieve that. But yeah, we have an entire task force focusing on national energy transition, and also we're working with the joint office. So I saw I showed the presentation there where JETP is working with only the IPGs, which is only the 10 countries. So the rest of the entire world is working with the joint office. So yeah, and we're positive we can reach that. Yeah.
Just to take it forward from there, maybe you can answer this. One of the criticism of Just Transition, JETP in Indonesia was the involvement of affected communities. Whether they were involved, they were consulted when you first of all agreed to this deal with these 10 countries. How will you respond to that?
Oh, this one I didn't mention. So when we created the CIPP, we involved more than 300 CSOs in the process of the making of the CIPP. So they're informed, they're involved. Plus, our commitment to involve the stakeholders that does not only include the government and the high level. We also try to take opinions and inputs from the people. We involve local and regional governments, the regional governments, as well as recently, Indonesia just launched Just Transition white paper on the sidelines of the New York Climate Week. And in that process also it involved a lot of consultation with the CSO. So we always do that, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Lebogang, the criticism from CSO in South Africa is that South Africa Just Energy Transition Plan is actually an energy transition plan. 95% of everything that you are going to invest is in energy transition, building electric vehicle infrastructure and investment in grid and electricity, whereas the skilling is a very small part of your investment. Community investment is also not very high. How do you respond to this criticism?
Yeah, so I'm laughing because I was part of the CSOs that made those criticisms. So before I was employed by the Presidential Climate Commission, I was within the unions, having looked at the initial investment plan that had only prioritized investment into electricity infrastructure, green hydrogen, and NEVs. That was the scope. But after the intervention of the president as well as the Presidential Climate Commission at that time, that's how we increased the areas of investment to include skills development as well as investment into municipalities in order to increase their capabilities in order to do the just part of this transition. So that's credit to the work of civil society, labor movements in South Africa to get us to that point. I think it's also important to look at issues in totality. So climate finance that is flowing to South Africa is not just within the JET IP space, right? This is only a specific portion of climate finance that we have access to, whereas there are other parts of climate finance. Also considering what is coming out of national government that is can be repurposed for this investment to ensure that indeed we have a higher proportion of investment in skills development, because like you said, it's very important. The partnership with the World Bank that is outside of this JET-IP, looking at repurposing of old coal-fired power stations, is looking at increasing significantly skills development funding in order to improve our prospects when it comes to skills development, so that we do have the types of skills that are required in the NEV space, green hydrogen space, as well as broader electricity reform. So I think it's important. Yes, there's a criticism on the JET-IP, but understand that JET-IP is a smaller fund that ideally must leverage and unlock additional funding, which is how this particular JET-IP for South Africa has been designed, in order to ensure that indeed we do unlock issues pertaining to skills development, economic diversification, which is very important for us here in South Africa. We have high unemployment levels. 35% of working age adults are unemployed in this country. So the idea is, specifically for the coal belt, because this is where we're focused on, if we diversify economic opportunities in that particular locality within our country, there can be additional opportunities outside of coal sector activities. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Good. Nilesh, ministry has set up a task force, right, to do some work on just transition, Ministry of Environment, with other ministries.
Well, I think so. Forest knows more than us on creation of such
There's
committees.
no task force?
As far as the task forces are concerned, we are going to rely on the good work which is being done under the aegis of Niti Aayog. And we did initially, when the Niti Aayog had not set up these committees around 6 months back or so, at that time we were contemplating to really have certain task forces we have to come up with our NDC and everything. So we were contemplating to do all that. But then this task force came up, and having this already being there was no point duplicating the efforts. So we have not done something like that.
Okay, but going ahead, you have seen the experience of Indonesia and South Africa on JET-P. Okay, India obviously at one point of time said we are not going to have JET-P, right? I'm not going to put you on the hot seat to ask you this question whether we are going to look at something like a just transition deal, which India will have with developed countries. But the question I have is this. Baku 29 is also being called as a finance COP, right? Developed countries have to pledge a new finance target. Okay. How do you see that evolving?
We just had the pre-COP and the discussions on NCQG. I think so, wherever we are, the developed countries and the developing countries probably are sticking to their positions as of now. Our position is very clear. Our position is that there is a responsibility on the developed countries to provide finance. The finance is supposed to be guided by Article 9. And 9.1 talks about shall. Who shall? So it is basically the developed countries. Of course, there are other provisions. 9.2 is there, 9.3 is there. So when we are talking of the NCQG, how this particular NCQG is going to be designed, it has to be decided upon by all the parties together. I must say that at COP29, it is the COP for finance, and this is the most important agenda item which has to be concluded there. But then at the moment, I would not really like to really speak beyond that, because that is something to be deliberated about among all the parties together. And I think so, if we have to take it, the commitments which have been made by various countries, and we have to come up with our NDC next year. And NCQG will really hold a lot on what is the level of ambition that is going to be reflected in the upcoming NDCs. Thank you.
Okay. Khalid, maybe I'll ask the last question before I open the floor to you. How do you see the finance COP, Baku? How do you see, what is the position of G77 plus China? How was the last meeting? Tell this room what the negotiations were.
I mean, the negotiations under the NCQG has been dealt with under the pre-COP. As Nilesh, put it clearly, still the parties are within their main positions, sticking to their positions, with the developing countries having Article 9.1 as their main guiding star. Just like I would give some reflections, like the implications on the just transition negotiations when it comes to the finance itself. It's been very clear, from the presentations that we got from the developed and the developing countries, that there is this kind of disparities between how the just transition is being approached within the national context. We would like to see that elevated on an international context, the approach that is being followed up by the developed countries. Specifically, we heard, for an example, from the EU, that they have specific financial mechanisms to finance their Green Deal. We would like to see that on a global level, because even the financial mechanism that is associated with the just transition or the European Green Deal is basically relying heavily on public finance. And under the convention and under the negotiations of the NCQG is also the role of the public finance is an integral part of the discussions, and we would like to see how this public finance is being mobilized and provided from the developed countries to the developing countries. So basically, we would like to see how the linkages that would result from the negotiations under the NCQG and the allocation of the adequate, predictable, and accessible finance to finance climate action, and at its core the just transition pathways for all countries.
Okay, thank you. We have 10 minutes, and what I'll do is to collect few questions for the panelists. So please, anyone, you can start. Yeah.
Hi, my name is
Please
Karthik.
introduce yourself and short question, please. Yeah.
Yes. So my name is Karthik. I had noticed in Lebogang's presentation that there was a little bit about MSMEs. So to what extent is the challenge being faced, in your respective countries, Mr. Bharadwaj, Kamala, as well as Lebogang, regarding financing for green transition for MSMEs, which is obviously an integral part of just transition.
Okay, thank you. We will collect the question, and then I'll go back to the panelists, please. Back, please. Yeah. Just one. I'll come back to you, Thiru. Just, yeah.
We have, these emerging economies which are very complex, and most of them are basically the producers of scope 3 emissions, because they are very much integrated as far as with supply chains are concerned, and with the industrial, manufacturing also is with concern. So do you feel that, that with these decarbonization policies, CBAM, etc., they will be the one who will be facing a lot of burden because of it, and assuming that US and developed countries basically go protectionist, they will will be the one who will basically, because they are the, for example, we are finding that, China has the massive overcapacity of EVs, etc. And after, investing so much in with the supply chains in Vietnam also regarding the semiconductors, etc. So they will be the one who will be facing the consequences of it, while the, developed countries will be able to get away with their, with their, because
Understood.
they are, yeah, so.
Got the question. Okay. It's about economic nationalism, CBAM. I'll come back to you. Third question, Thiru, please.
I'm Thiru Srinivasan. I head the task force in the Tamil Nadu state for electrification, electric vehicles. My question is, we talk about finance, where the contribution from the north. There's a lot of technology and there's also resources, where resources are locked up and things like access to resources, whether it is raw material and other resources. So how is that being planned in the activities of Niti Aayog and the work that you're doing, and how will that be taken up with the negotiations?
Okay, I'll take one more question. If there is a, yeah, yeah, please.
My name is Chaitra. I'm representing AIGCC. My question is on the taxonomy. So we heard about the climate taxonomy in the July budgetary announcement. I just wanted to check if our representatives from Niti Aayog or the MOEF have any sort of update on what the climate taxonomy will look like. And corresponding question to that is, a lot of the taxonomies globally have described social co-benefits. So I was wondering if the taxonomy will have a people-centric lens in the Indian context.
Okay, so what I'll do is that Kamala and Lebogang can talk about how you are dealing with MSME sector, okay, in your Just Transition Plan. Yeah, Lebogang, you can start.
Yeah, sure, and I'll make this very brief. So in the South African context, SMMEs employ 60% of persons employed within the country. So noting that, we've realized that it's very important to provide creative opportunities to SMMEs, but also to assist them to bounce back. So the first intervention that I highlighted as part of, JET funding opportunities is the National Treasury's Bounce Back Guarantee Scheme that gives incentives to SMME sector to be able to install additional generation. We currently have an energy crisis here in South Africa with a bit of energy insecurity, and it was important to ensure the survival of the SMMEs by ensuring that we have this particular incentive scheme to make sure that they can procure additional generation capacity for themselves. Also, in terms of adaptation and resilience, the South African government is establishing a climate change response fund that is dedicated to the SMME sector, so that they'll be able to build back if there are any disasters. So those are the ways in which we are thinking of the SMME sector because of the importance as creators of jobs here in South Africa.
Kamala?
Yeah, it's actually quite similar to my colleague here in South Africa. For JETP Indonesia, we're not in the process. I mean, we've chosen the projects, but the funding has not been dispersed, right? So what we do is definitely, we have our Just Transition framework that would involve with reskilling and upskilling for those MSMEs and the surroundings that are involved. That are going to be affected when, let's say, there's a coal phase out and there's a specific change in the transition, right? They're going to be affected. So they're involved. And as for the choosing of the project in relation to the MSMEs, we chose projects that are not necessarily huge, but would have direct impact by 2030. Yeah. So that's from Indonesia. Thank you.
So Nilesh and Anshu, you have some specific question, but I want to bring this entire economic nationalism in the name of climate change that is sweeping through. US election is all about economic nationalism. CBAM is there now. The government of India has made its point very clear that it does not agree with climate change being used as a trade barrier. Okay, our ministers have very clearly stated it. How do you see, Nilesh, this playing out in the international negotiations?
This already played out as far as climate change negotiations are concerned. During the COP28, the basic group came up with a proposal agenda item which was related to unilateral trade measures. And of course, the agenda was not adopted because before the adoption, there is a discussion that happens. It was not adopted. But what it definitely led to was that during whole of the discourse that we had during the 2 weeks, around 2 weeks in COP28, it was not just the basic countries. A lot of G77 plus China countries, small countries, island countries, they started mentioning this. And it was mentioned, I can't give you the number, but many countries. And what we have ultimately in the global stocktake decision is the para 154, which talks of the unilateral trade measures or unilateral measures, which should not be kind of a unilateral trade measures. So that para is there. So from the negotiation point of view, if you needed an outcome with respect to such measures in whatever name by whichever country, so there is a reiteration of this particular element, which is basically a reiteration of Article 3.5 of UNFCCC. So UNFCCC already had this built in and has been reiterated in GST decision, which was finalized in COP28 last year.
Anshu, you want to add something on CBAM? No. Okay. The question that was raised to you in terms of is the working group looking at the stock, okay, which already exists right now.
It was both on technology and availability of resources because, for example, lithium and other things, they're being locked up, things like that. Are we also addressing?
Yes. So there is you're absolutely right, Thiru. There is a working group which looks at the India's critical mineral requirements, which examines this very aspect. So depending upon the technologies which are essential to drive the transition, what is the dependence on critical minerals, lithium, nickel, cobalt, and the likes of them, and what is our dependence on global supply chains for these minerals, and how we can make us more resilient to these supply chains. That's the question. Yeah. Yes. I just put a caveat that there's only so much that we can examine in this report in the context of India's net zero pathways. But we will take up subsequent studies which examine these issues in more detail, and most happy to.
But also, before Nilesh come, Anshu, the climate taxonomy question that the lady asked. Yeah.
You're right. This was announced in the budget. Department of Economic Affairs is the lead ministry which is working on this. We are providing our inputs to them on specific aspects of the climate taxonomy, but they are the lead ministry which is taking it forward.
Okay. So Nilesh, you, and I'll give the last word to Khaled to wrap up. Yeah.
Thank you for putting it directly to me. You would have seen that I'm really not ready to take any questions. But thank you for putting that question. And there are very specifics that you are asking for. From the negotiation point of view, we are talking in the context of climate and of course COP, etc. But I would like to draw your attention to the negotiations that happened also some on the other platform that we had the chairmanship of presidency of G20 last year. And there is this energy transition working group. Last year, the environment and the energy transition working group, we had it separated, unlike the previous years where energy and environment were together. And in that also this element of critical minerals and the supply chains that was dealt with. Even in this year's under Brazilian presidency, the Energy Transition Working Group, the ministerial is already over on 4th. And they also have a para related to critical minerals and their supply chain. So I think so from the negotiation point of view, yes, the G20 countries are recognizing the importance of critical minerals and how to ensure the continuity of the availability of these critical minerals. But I can go only thus far. No, Father. Thank you very much.
Khalid, last word to you. What do you see coming out of COP29?
Well, that's the toughest question ever to any negotiator that could be asked. I mean, we hope that the at COP29 the parties would come to more implementation mode to our previous, commitments, and we hope that developed and developing countries would come together in a constructive manner so that we would deliver on most of the mandates that we have under the decisions according to the agenda. It's really hard, to expect, which decisions would be able to have its ground and be adopted, and which would struggle more. But it's pretty much clear that finance is at the core of the expectations coming out from COP29. There is a lot of expectations coming out from the developing countries that we should be able to deliver on a very ambitious new climate goal that has been under the negotiations for almost 3 years now. The quantum of this goal in the numbers that should be delivered, with public finance having a big role in the provision of this finance to the developed countries, also in providing the stimulus for more financial resources to be available within the process. So basically, this would be the expectations, and this would would be considered a success of COP29. When it comes specifically to the just transition, the topic that we are focusing in our dialogue today, from the developing countries, we would like to see that the ambitious transitions plans of the North being extended to the South. We see that only feasible by referring to the main principles that has been guiding our climate action under the Convention and the Paris Agreement, with developed countries taking the lead in reducing emissions and providing financial and technical support to developing countries as per Article 9 of the Paris Agreement. We also would like to see that the multilateral process being strengthened through cooperative approaches, not through unilateral measures. This is something that we would like to see as an outcome as well coming out from COP29.
Thank you very much. Please give a big hand to this panel. I think as provocative I was trying to be, I think I got the best out of two negotiators and Anshu. So thank you very much. Thank you, Lebogang, Kamala, Nilesh, Anshu, Khalid, for this excellent panel.